The southern part of Jefferson County was the first area tonight where damage and power outages were reported. In Lorain, there were reports of a tree on fire. This power line was sparking as crews worked to repair it. In Adams, Route 11 was temporarily closed after a tree fell on a wire. Then the power pole snapped. The road was reopened around 7:45, but downed trees and power lines have been happening across the North Country and much of the state today, continuing to happen tonight as we come to you live tonight. National Grid staged crews, of course, of its own and teams from third-party contracts across the region ahead of the storm so they could quickly react to these outages. Before damage started happening tonight, we saw crews waiting at hotels across Watertown. They've spent the rest of this evening and tonight going from scene to scene as calls have been coming in.